we have a ripple effect. All of us do. And that ripple effect can be positive, negative. How we show up and how we interact and how we respond is the difference sometimes between what someone does and what they don't do.
Welcome to the InPowered Life Podcast,
a space dedicated to spreading the message that you have the power within to create everything you seek.
So if you're ready to enroll in a new kind of higher learning, the kind that leads to true personal freedom, hang here with us.
We're your hosts, Rudi and Aniston, and this is InPowered Life. Welcome to the InPowered Life Podcast. My name is Rudi Ricksteins, and today we're bringing an incredible human being, somebody that I absolutely love and have had the privilege of getting to know a little bit from afar. And not 30 minutes ago did we get the opportunity for us to really just hit connection and start touching base, finding out a little bit about who we are, our grassroots. And man, there are so many similarities. I know that anybody that listens to the InPowered Life podcast who is striving to be a better person, to be a better human being, to be better in every single aspect of the life is going to really dial into this episode. So I am just really excited to introduce the better human himself, Greg Witz. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the show, brother.
Brother, what amazing intro, huh? I'm like, I got to take a page out of your book. That was a fantastic start. Great
Man,
to be.
I am so excited. I am so excited. Anybody that is wanting to go out and into the world and to create an impact already has me right up front. And
Yeah.
you just so beautifully and boldly, and I'm going to say unapologetically, just help support people to be better. I love your approach. I love that you're not scared of the no BS approach to talking to leaders inside of companies. You've worked with everybody from the White House to solo entrepreneurs to entire corporate organizations. You're supporting people in their individual personal lives, and then you're supporting entire companies. And so that is just truly what I get to do each and every single day. I'll put a caveat in there. I have yet to support the White House, but now that I've read that in your bio, I'm like, I've got to add that to the list. Man, you have just had.
We got to get you there. We got to bring you down, right? And get you to do some of your sessions and coaching there.
Oh my gosh, man, you have just got such a colorful life, colorful history. I love the impact that you're making. You came highly recommended through a dear friend of ours, Amberly Lago. And so I would love for you to just do an introduction. Tell us a little bit about what got you to be who you are today.
Sure. So, traditionally we do, or corporately we do training and development, right? Which is very much focused on personal development. And I've been in the industry for about 27 years. I started it I got into it because my father started the company. And at the time I needed a summer job. So fast forward that, got into it and got exposed to this whole world of personal development, interpersonal skills, self-awareness, communication skills, emotional intelligence, which I'm very passionate about. And it's a big piece that I deliver, teach, and work on. And the gambit of whatever we might want to call those human skills onwards. And I remember at the time thinking, this isn't stuff that you learn. You're either born with the gift of the gab, you're born with the ability to lead people, you're naturally sort of good when it comes down to these interactions. And I was exposed to the world of psychology, which, really started to answer a few questions. First, this whole world of communication and people and relationships and emotions. There are tools, there are frameworks, there are concepts for us to learn to be more effective as parents, right? I think that's one of the greatest responsibilities we have when it comes down to leadership, which is how do we lead these young little human beings into being great decision makers and great impactors, right? Spousing, right? Marriage is hard, right? Partnerships are hard, whether it be business or personal. So how do we successfully show up within these relationships, either contributing in a positive way and ideally, allowing the relationship to grow? And the gambit goes on. So, that's how I got into it. And it's been a passion and, never thought I'd be here 27 years later, but this is it, man. This is the purpose.
You're obviously doing incredibly well. You are in an industry that is just booming at this point, but 27 years later, you're leading the charge, right? There's a handful of people that are doing it at the level that you've been doing it at. And so I want to just focus in on that for a second. And let me ask you, if you were to look at you and your approach, and I'm going to go back and say it's a no BS approach. I love how you are very vocal about calling bullshit right up front in how you coach or in supporting people and saying, you have to look at you, or you're the problem, or why don't you fix, as opposed to people are just trying to make someone feel really good about themselves while they're in the process of coaching or supporting them. But what would you say is the one thing that you think separates you from other people that are in your space or that have been in your space? Because there's something about the approach that you have that has supported you in being so successful for so long.
Right. It's a great question. And I'll take my hat off to the actual programming and core concepts that the company has, right? I mean, we've built a tremendous amount of frameworks allowing us to sort of manage in these roles more effectively. I've always said this. The one thing we never learn is people. You don't learn how to be married. You don't learn how to parent. You don't learn how to communicate. You don't learn how to handle conflict. We figure this stuff out, right? We're faced with these types of situations as we progress forward in life. And, the more we get out there and get into our professional worlds, the more we start to bump up against these things. And if we're not careful, these interpersonal conflicts and challenges end up knocking us back. So I think what really makes us successful is the programming and the way we deliver it, our proprietary assessment, our proprietary concepts. And we've always taken an approach when it comes down to development of training and coaching. I think most organizations, or what you start to see with individuals, is they'll do the training piece. And if you're not careful, it's a lot of information, a lot of interesting concepts, a lot of interesting theories. And without the practice behind that, then it's just us, reading the book. I think the biggest failure when it comes down to the industry that we're in is people will listen to the podcast, people will do the program, people will, sign up for the workshop, the webinar, and that's the effort. I did the webinar, I did the program, right? I did the session. And I often have clients, they'll call me up and they'll say, listen, we have an executive, we have an individual or a high potential we want you to train or work with from a coaching standpoint. And it's usually a little bit of like, okay, well, what's the reasons you want me to work with them? And the common line is they need a little bit of Greg. They need a little bit of that sort of non-bullshit, kind of just call them out on their stuff, specifically when you're getting into more senior positions, right? Because people have blind spots, right? People don't lean into their dysfunction. And one of the best things we can do when it comes down to personal development is begin with self-awareness. And I often say this to people: self-awareness is not a warm, fuzzy exercise. This is not something like, oh, I'm a green personality and this is fantastic. True self-awareness requires a tremendous amount of responsibility. We have to be responsible for our dysfunction, for our negative behaviors, for our unconsciousness in how we show up. And if I could lean into that, I could start to put some things into managing it. But again, the second piece to this is really the actioning of it. So the way we deliver and the way we design programs is there's a strong emphasis on application. And it sounds a little, pitchy, but it's, the more we get to work in between the sessions, the more we get to work in actually applying some of these things, the more successful we're going to be. And like anything, I mean, this sports skill, the more we run the plays, the more we actually practice. You're a tennis guy, the more you get up and you start hitting that ball, the more effective you're going to be at sort of making contact, and then eventually being a little more precise in how and where you put that shot.
So I would love to give our audience something that they can walk away with today. And so if there is somebody right now that is struggling in taking accountability for something that's happening in their life, because I believe we always start with accountability, which is very much what you were referring to a moment ago. But if there's somebody right now that is either in a relationship, so let's say it's their spouse, or whether it's a relationship at work or just with the world at large, but if they were wanting to create a shift, they just feel like they're very unhappy, there are things that are frustrating in them in their life, and they just don't know where to start, what would be the approach that you would give somebody to at least begin that conversation?
It's a great question. And I think where I want to take us is understanding our personality. Why do we behave and tick and operate and feel and respond and react the way I do? This is not mystical stuff, right? So there was a psychiatrist named Dr. Eric Burns. In fact, it's one of the main models we use. And what it says is there's a structure to your personality. And by understanding the structure to your personality, it answers three really important questions. Question number one, which is, who am I? And it's kind of what you're floating to, right? Who am I as a personality, right? which now gives me the capacity to have a little more ownership and accountability with that, right? It's not such a foreign thing on why I do what I do. Point number two is if I understand who I am as number one. Number two is why do I behave and react and feel the way I do? Where do these things come from? And number three, how did I develop these habits, right? What the model says is that we have three main sections to our personality. So for the audience, if you visualize three bubbles, right? If you picture like I got these three circles, these three sides to my personality, and we've given these sides of your personality, these sides to your personality names. And the concept or the terminology we want you thinking about should give us instant access to why I respond, communicate, and behave the way I do. So the first side of our personality is something called the parental ego state. So these different sides to your personalities are called ego states. And the first side is something called the parental ego state. Now, for the audience and for you, Rudi, I mean, think about it. If I said, listen, you're acting like my father, or, the way you're speaking is very parental, and we stop the conversation here, the audience and yourself know exactly what I'm talking about. You've got a definition and a description for this type of behavior, right? Maybe even your spouse says, if they knew your parents, and they say things like, you're acting just like your mother, you're acting just like your father. My wife uses this against me, right? She'll be like, who you sound like, and it sends me to the moon, right? Now, the opposite to this is something called the child side to your personality. And really from a place of accountability and awareness, this is the thing we got to learn and we got to figure out, right? The child side to my personality. See, the child side to your personality is emotion, it's feelings. And without having a description or understanding on where these emotions and reactions come from, it becomes very difficult for us to operate with more emotional intelligence or management, right? And the joke we make about life is we sacrifice and surrender life's most important decisions to my child personality. I get married through the child, I get divorced through the child, right? I quit the job through the child, I send the email through the child. Sometimes I even drive the car through the child. And what's very interesting, and I'm sure you and the audience have just in the terminology that I'm using, child, 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 and emotion, we all have a reference for what that looks like, right? I might say the reason we have an inability to operate with accountability is because it is the child side of our personality that is driving. That's not the side of your personality that operates with awareness and accountability. That's the side of your personality that operates with self-preservation, right? Emotions and feelings. You kind of think about this as we'll always rationalize that reaction, right? Even though we kind of feel guilty about it. And what operates or what anchors us in the middle, the thing that allows us to govern our personality, the thing that allows us to operate with more intention, more consciousness, more effectiveness is what we call the adult side of our personality. So for the audience, if you picture those three bubbles, those three circles, we got a parent, an adult, and a child side to our personality. And here's what we often talk about when it comes down to communication and relationships. When you communicate, you are communicating out of one side of your personality. And depending on what's happening in that moment, you will then draw out another side of the personality. This is the other half to the model. And for the audience and for you, got to appreciate like what we're covering off today is quite an in-depth concept. But we want to make it, something that like people can go and use and they can apply and they can action right after the show, right? So when we think about how we communicate, we follow a very simple rule called PRAT. It stands for people respond as treated, right? It's the first piece that allows me to operate with more responsibility, which is I will impact and influence this interaction. In a lot of cases, I have a lot of domain over how someone else responds and communicates. Burns's book was called Games People Play, and it was based on this. I'm okay. You're okay. You're not okay. I'm not okay. And he called these transactions. I mean, think about this, man. I mean, this is like a typical conversation with our spouse, right? Right? How was your day? Oh, worst day. Oh, you know what? You're always so negative. What happened to that interaction? Those were like three lines that just went back and forth that all of a sudden that potentially leads to a conflict. And if we think about it, if we're not aware and we don't understand where our personality contributes to this, think about how easy it is for us to blame the other person in the interaction, right? Because it's not me, right? It's the other person. So let's break this down a little bit further. Let's talk about the child side of your personality. The child side of your personality, these three ego states, well, there's 3 points to emotion. You have 3 child states to your personality. The first is what's known as the most natural child. And for the audience, if you've ever seen Rudi jumping up on the stage and doing his thing and motivating and like that high energy and that extroversion, this is what we call your spontaneous child. You know, Rudi, if I was like, listen, you got a really strong spontaneous child to your personality, and we stop the conversation there, you're gonna, I know exactly what you're talking about, right?
Absolutely.
You're optimistic, you're energetic, you're fun, you're dynamic, right? Now, we all have these sides to our personality, but depending on who we are and our upbringing and experiences, really contributes or will define how we've developed to these sides of our personality. And to fast forward the conversation of self-awareness and accountability, by understanding this, I can now understand which sides of my personality I need to strengthen. And more importantly, for accountability, which sides of my personality do I need to manage more? Because this isn't about changing and waving a magical wand and pretending that we've turned into something. This is about the true exercise of responsibility and accountability, which is, why do I behave and respond and communicate the way I do? And if I understand that, and I understand the place in my personality and where it comes from, I can now have access and tools to affecting it. Sometimes I got to turn this up. Sometimes I got to turn it down. Now, your spontaneous child is also your creative side. You know, before the show, we were talking about joking around and sort of in that social environment, right? Being funny, cracking jokes, telling stories, right? This is a very sort of creative side to your personality. The other name of the spontaneous child is also the free child. So for the audience, if you're married to someone that you always want to strangle sometimes because they never take things seriously, you're probably married to a very strong, spontaneous child type of personality. Now, that's the easy or the fun side of our child. The next two sides to the child personality is called the withdrawn and the angry child. And just the names alone, Rudi, you know what I'm talking about, right? If I said it's going
Absolutely.
to be like, in that argument, like you became a withdrawn child. And I know you became the withdrawn child because the other person was in their angry child mode. And sometimes, as we said, people respond as treated. What do we do in these situations? We back off. But if you made the logical decision to back off through your withdrawn child, right, you can't now go home and kick the dog. Now, what happens to us in the withdrawn child state is this is our avoidant, withdrawn side to our personality. This is our flight. So in our self-preservation. Now, we don't have to run away from tigers anymore, but we have to survive our brand, our identity, our reputation, right? We have to survive our emotions. So what do we do in a conflict situation? Most of us will bite our tongue, specifically in a business environment, right? And now the question comes down to, when you're dealing with that emotion, when you're dealing with that stress and you internalize it or you withdraw with it, where does it go? It goes inward. And when I work with people and coaching relationships and we're broaching into the world of emotional management, one of the things I talk to a lot of people about, specifically males, is how important it is that you recognize that one of the things you tend to do is not manage emotions, and the way you cope with it is by internalizing those emotions. You internalize stress. You know, I've said this for years. The thing that killed my father wasn't cancer. It was years and years of internalized stress and emotion. Because how do you learn how to cope with that? Bottle it up, compartmentalize it, right? And even ladies, you know, it's not just a guy thing. Ladies, we have these backpacks, right? You tend to fill those backpacks a lot. And if you're not careful, the withdrawn child goes, or this side of your personality goes from contributing to, in positive ways like reflection, to now escalating into, once again, withdrawing and avoiding, right? You know, often when even teaching people assertiveness, people are like, I need to learn how to be assertive. And what you realize when you assess their personality, it has nothing to do with assertiveness. It has everything to do with learning how to manage their withdrawn child, right? Now, the final child is the angry child. It's my favorite child. I'm assuming you're South African, you've got a strong angry child as well, right? On a positive note, this is also known as the competitive child, right? The tenacious child, right? The fighting child, the aggressive child. But one of the things we start to see in personalities and communication is when these two ego states mix and when these two ego states get out of hand, the withdrawn child and the angry child, it's a recipe for disaster. This is where we end up with covert behavior, passive aggressive behavior. This is internalized emotion, internalized frustration, right? And if you're not careful, by the time you now go try to manage, navigate, deal with the person or the conflict, you're not dealing with it through your adult ego state. What are we dealing with it through? That's right, audience, our angry child, right? And the truth to it is the more you internalize that angry child side of your personality, the better it feels to let it out. That's why when we drive a car, and someone tries to merge in your lane, what do we all do, right? And some people listening are going, no, I let them in. I'm a warm driver. I share the road. Yes, on a good day. On a bad day, what you do is you close the gap, you look at them, and where did that come from, right? You travel a lot. You probably see a lot of angry child personalities in the airport, right?
Yep,
Them on the
absolutely.
plane,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And you look at people, and even in customer service situations, I say to people, when you're calling customer service, don't call customer service out of your angry child side. You're not setting yourself up for success, right? When you need to make a decision about your kids, don't make that through your angry child. When you need to go have a conversation with your spouse, manage your angry child, because this side of your personality, the only thing it's looking to do in the moment, right, is to share the pain and to let that frustration out.
All
You
right.
with me
So
so far?
so absolutely. And what I want to do now is zero in a little bit because you used such a beautiful word, right? And you said, how do you manage whichever child that you're in? And so I know you're
Correct.
heading that way, but I want to make sure our audience follows because you've just dropped a tremendous amount of information. And so many people are thinking, like, I understand that I'm going to be any one of these at any given time, but now
Mhm.
what the hell do I do with that? And so, how, and I have a twofold question. So, we can answer it either in one go or we can do them one at a time. But I would love to know, because I think this is going to serve our audience the best, is that when you identify that you are in one of these states, how do you manage that? And then the
Mhm.
second follow up to that is when you see someone is in one of those states, how do you manage them?
Correct. Correct. So let's break this all down. So there's no one size fits all answer, right? But the beginning of it is the answer in itself. Recognizing that you are in your child ego state is step one, right? One of the things that we have to appreciate about emotional management is not hacking up the child and not feeling it. In fact, it is catching the child. What we do in emotional management and intelligence is we just get better at catching and pausing the instinctive reaction. Doesn't mean we don't feel, doesn't mean that that angry child or that withdrawn child doesn't kick in. What we do is we recognize, aha, there was a trigger. And not in the woke narrative of everyone is triggered today, but there is a trigger event. And that trigger event can be pushing up against either your values or it could be more situational. But one of the things we know as human beings is we will feel before we think. So as we are facing these scenarios, the tension, the stress, the potential conflict, the person, right? It is the child ego state that is coming up to address it. My success in all of this is being able to pause my instinctive reaction. And one of the ways we teach that very simply is something called the stop concept, right? Which is if I got my angry child going, it's probably easier to think about a stop concept in that, like pausing the thing. Let me not say the thing. Let me sort of give myself a little bit of debrief or a little bit of decompress. In fact, there are only 4 researched ways to manage anger, right? You ready for this? The number one most effective way to manage anger is delay, right? In fact, in Canada, not so much America, but in Canada, if you get a gun license, one of the laws is how you store your guns. And the reason for that is there's a delay. If anything, if you react one day, right, and you want to go and grab your gun, right, by the time you're done opening the locker and unlocking the gun and taking the trigger lock off and putting the firing pin back in and going to the separate place for the ammo, there's a delay. And there's an average of if you can delay 12 minutes between the reaction and the emotion, or the emotion and the action, you'll calm down, right? Think about how many times, Rudi, you've been pissed off in life, and given the right amount of time, you calm down. Some of us even go and zen out. We stare off into space and we meditate and we breathe deeply. It's delay. That's all it is, right? The second researched way in managing anger is distraction. We do this with kids. Kids having a meltdown. What do we do? Woo, hello, look at this shiny thing over here. Try to distract them. Third is relaxation. Can I go and relax? Meditation is a good example of this, right? Distraction would be something like doing a gratitude exercise, right? Delay, we could even look at journaling, sort of writing out some of those thoughts, right? And the final way is something called incompatibility. If you're angry, if you're in your angry child mode, and I put you, do you like dogs, by the way, Rudy?
I do.
Are you a
I'm
dog
a dog
person?
person. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So you're really angry, and I put a puppy in your hand, right? And you're holding this puppy, right? And for the audience, if you're a dog person, puppies have a very distinct smell, right? And they're soft and they're cute. And you're holding this thing, and you're like, I can't be angry anymore. This thing in my arms that I'm holding. And if you're a cat person, think about a kitten. And if you're not an animal person, think about a baby, right? So those are the 4 researched ways which allow me to manage anger. And if you notice in all of them, it doesn't mean that you stop feeling. Delays, not stopping feeling, relaxing, incompatibility, right? Distraction. What we're doing is we're creating distance, space between the trigger and the reaction. I'm a very strong angry child personality. It's why I'm successful as an entrepreneur. It's why I'm as competitive as I am, right? But man, I'm fire, right? I could get pretty hot pretty quick, right? Where do I need to manage this the most? Not with my clients. That's the easy part. With my 7-year-old, right? That's where I have to do the work. With my wife, that's where I have to do the work. Driving a car, that's when I have to do the work. Flying, by the way, all right? It's one of the worst environments, the worst things you could do to me. First, I'm a super control freak, right? And in an airport, in a plane, you can't control anything. And when we can't control things, what are we left with? Emotion. The emotion in me, one of my strongest child traits, my strongest child sides of my personality is the angry child, right? Now, back to this where we started, accountability and awareness. Me being an angry child or having the strong side to my personality isn't a negative thing. It actually becomes a negative thing when I am unaware of it and I haven't put in the practice and the tools for managing it. One of those 4 ways. Sometimes Greg Witz just needs to not say something. I need to create space. That's the delay. Sometimes I do need to go off and do some of my own work, do my debriefing documents and tools, right? That's the distraction, right? Sometimes it is, I live in Costa Rica, let's go watch the sunset. It's a big thing in Costa Rica, right? There's incompatibility and relaxing. Now, you also asked another great question, which is how do I deal with someone else's emotions, right? And one of the things that we appreciate out of the world of psychology is something called debriefing. When someone is heightened in their emotion, right? One of the things we know is they're heightened in stress as well. The tool of debriefing or the concept of debriefing, giving that person a space to debrief, to process, to talk through. Therapies like this, counseling's like this, right? Seeing the psychologist is like this. That's the joke about the psychologist, right? You show up 4, 5, 6 sessions. You're like, I don't know why this is working, but this is really good stuff. What did the psychologist give all of us? They gave us an opportunity to talk about our stuff, uninterrupted, unjudged, right? Without judgment, without solutioning. So that's part of the tool. Now, for the audience, this doesn't mean that you go and you give people space to completely, misbehave. But as leaders and as parents, it is a very important skill to learn, right? So that's part 1. Part 2, right? The other side of our personality we haven't spoken about yet is our parental state. And when we think about the parental ego states of our personality, there are 2 sides to it. It's a coin, a heads and a tail. And for the audience, when you think about parents, you think about 2 types of behavior. Disciplinarian parent, loving parent. We call this the critical parent and the nurturing parent. Now, if we can sort of spend some time on the nurturing parent, this becomes a very important tool or side of our personality to help debrief and manage other people's child ego states. Now, I'm not talking about nurturing where you are now giving permission to behave badly, but patience, tolerance, understanding, compassion. One of the things we have to remind ourselves as people is when someone is reacting in their angry child state, they are frying out. They're screaming for help. Think about customer service. How many times have you been screaming at customer service for help? And it's the person on the other end of the phone that operates with a nurturance, a service, a giving, an empathy, right? That allows us to decompress or deflate a little bit. So we want to think about the child ego states like balloons. That balloon can be inflated. My job is to help deflate it, right? Through nurturance. I'll pause there and just do a temperature check. Is this making sense so far?
It's absolutely beautiful. And I want to put this in a really simple example because I love to give the audience a tangible tip or tactic that they can apply, because everything that you're saying is brilliant. And I hope that the audience goes back and re-listens. And if they haven't done so, take notes, because I think that when we can pay attention to how we're showing up and why we're feeling or processing any particular emotion, create separation between us and the emotion, we have new information that we have access to. And we have new information, we can make better decisions. And that when somebody else is having an emotional reaction, we're also drawing that experience from them, or we're fueling their experience. And so, it's music to my ears. I said in the very beginning of the episode that you and I are kindred souls. We're two people that are journeying a path, very different journeys, but man, it is just so beautifully aligned. And I knew this was going to be a great, great, great episode. And so I want to thank you just for pouring into our audience up to now. Years ago, I was working on a cruise ship, and I'd mentioned this to you actually before we hit record. And every now and again, I would have guests that would come up to me and they would be really upset. They'd be irate. Something happened. Something went wrong. Sometimes it had something to do with the department I was working in, and sometimes it had to do with somebody else on board. And I would always handle it exactly the same way. Now, let's be very clear. My role or job function had nothing to do with customer service. But people would come up to me and say, I just have to tell you, I'm really angry. This thing happened. And I would respond exactly the same way every single time. I would pull out a legal pad and I would hand them a pen and I would say to them, I want to know every detail of what you're talking about. If you could do me a favor and put this down on paper for me. And so I would stop them from, word vomiting their emotional state directly at me, on me. And I would say, I want you to write this down in as much color, with as much emotion. You tell me the whole story and put it on paper, because this is how I can do something about it. Mm-hmm. And then they'd go and sit down like 2 feet or 10 feet away from me, and they would write out feverishly. And then as they were writing, the emotions would start to subside and logic would come back in. And then they would walk up to me and they'd hand it to me and they would thank me for having them be seen, heard, valued, and appreciated. And then I would throw the freaking letter away and they would carry on with their life and I would carry on with mine. And I know that that wasn't the most appropriate way to handle it, but what I did was I created separation between them and their emotion.
Correct. And you said something very powerful there. You said the thing that's going to allow that to happen is information. Information changes everything. Information provides emotional containment. Mm-hmm. Right? Let's picture driving down the highway, right? For the audience. Like if you're in Chicago, LA, New York, Toronto, London, UK, you know what traffic's like. Traffic sucks. Okay. You get on there, you're stressed, you're trying to drive somewhere, right? In fact, I've got a meeting I got to go down to on Wednesday to the downtown core, and I'm already stressed about it. I'm thinking, oh my God, I got to go down the traffic, blah, 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 right? So I want you to picture this. You're driving down the highway, right? And you hit a ton of traffic. Right? Audience, you could really visualize this, right? Just picture yourself sitting in that car, the radio, the music's going, you're listening to Rudi on the podcast, right? You're in the car, maybe it's a little hot, the windows are down, right? Little beeping horns, and you just see all the cars, the red lights just lined up. And you're trying to get somewhere. You need to be somewhere within, call it 30 minutes, right? You need to be at the appointment. You got a doctor's appointment, you're picking your kid up from school, right? Something where you're like, oh gosh, I got to get there. And as you're sitting in this traffic, right? And the traffic's building up and building up and building up, what's happening to all of us? Our heart rate's starting to accelerate, right? We're getting a little more tense, a little more aggressive. Like, what the hell's happening? Where like, is this going to move? And then as you look up, you see a digital board. It says 7 minutes to your exit. What happens to all of us? We all calm down, right? Because what happened there, Rudi? We have information. Where I am to where I'm going is going to take this much longer. We do it in airports, right? Why there are signs everywhere. So what you did in that moment where you said, listen, go and write this stuff down. There's 2 things that you're doing there. First, you're giving them the opportunity to what I describe as emotionally vomiting, but you're doing it on the paper, right? And you said something interesting there, which is even the terminology, the description that you use. You said, tell me the story. That's what debriefing is. That's what therapy is. We sit down with therapists and they say, tell me what's going on. Tell me the story. I'm like, oh, wow, this is what happened, right? If you're a really good friend, you can do this for friends as well, but it's sometimes hard, right? We do it with hairdressers. You sit down in the hairdresser. They're like, how's it going? You're like, well, and you start telling them the deepest, darkest secrets about your life, about your marriage, about your children, about your business. Complete strangers, right? Sit next to people on the plane, start talking to them. Next thing you know, you're spilling your guts. We as human beings have a need to express. And when given the right opportunity, as Rudi did on the cruise ship with that customer that said, oh, I'm angry. And he said, come on, write it all out. That's debriefing. The other thing that it does is with that new information, we gain perspective. And if we could do those two things as parents, as leaders, as spouses, as human beings on this planet, I mean, what a gift. We have a responsibility to leave everyone. Actually, I'll change that. We have a ripple effect. All of us do. And that ripple effect can be positive, negative. How we show up and how we interact and how we respond is the difference sometimes between what someone does and what they don't do.
Amen. Gosh, I love that so much, so much. So I have just 1,000 things that I would love to know, but I think our audience is going to be able to get all of the information to all of the questions I have for you on the Better Human podcast. And so I'm going to encourage every single person that loves the conversation we're having right now to hop over and listen to the Better Human podcast, because obviously I've gone over, I've listened to a little bit of what you do. I you selfishly plugged Amberly Lago, dear friend of mine, in the beginning of the episode because she introduced us. And
Mhm.
Amberly has only connected me with a handful of people, and every single one of them have become dear friends of mine because she knows the kind of people that I love and thrive around. So I'm grateful to her for the conversation. I'm grateful for having you join the conversation. But I want to pause for a moment in what you're doing and how you're supporting people to be better people in not only themselves, but in how they show up and create that ripple effect, which I love so much. I want
Mhm.
to point out, as the empowered life is all about the power lies within, and every single moment is preparing you for the person that you get to become. I would love to know, because you jumped right over this in the beginning of the episode, and I'm sure that there's going to be people that are wanting to know just a little bit more. How did your life specifically prepare you to be the man that you are today, leading so many people?
Mm. Good question, man. Really good question. You know, I was in this industry for a long time without realizing the importance of the work that I did. And truthfully, I think it was when my father suddenly died and I was thrust into a position of having to take over everything, right? You know, my mother said, she said, your father's death was his greatest gift to you. And what that meant was two things. One, practice what we preach. Let's do the work ourselves as much as we teach it. And then of course get screened, right? But it was that moment in my life, and this was now what, close to 14 years ago, that I realized the importance of the work we do, because the thing that allowed me to cope and to navigate that time, which was riddled with a number of different things. You know, if you lose your father, you lose your boss, right? But you lose this massive sort of, figure in your life, which, for the first time, you're now thrust into the position of having to take responsibility, right? Responsibility for other people, responsibility for the business, responsibility for the work that we do. Um, so I think that was the thing. I learned and did and for years and years and years, but that was the time, that was the tipping point, that was the catalyst for me to actually take this on. And I'll never forget, we sat down as a group, the team, a bunch of people that work in the business, and the question is, what do we want to do? Do we want to continue the work? Right? Is the work that important? Are we making a difference? And I say we because it's not just me. There's a team. There's a big community of people that have been part of WITS. And we said, let's do this. Let's run the business for a year. And at the end of the year, if it's working out, we'll continue. And we did. And it was going great. And the second moment for me was when the pandemic hit, right? Because we went to zero in revenue. 2020. Was it 2020? Yeah, 2020. Zero in revenue. And we sat down and said, look, if we truly believe in what we do, why don't we just deliver all the training and the coaching for free? No one's paying for it anyway. Everyone's sitting at home. Let's just do it. And we did it. And it was revenue for that year was shit, but it was one of the best years that I've had in my career, where we truly just did the coaching and the training for the pure exercise of growth and personal development and contributing to people's lives and helping. I believe we all have responsibility to give back and to do it a little bit better tomorrow than we did today.
It is absolutely beautiful. And so I'm going to take that response. And first, I want to just give condolences to you for the loss of your father. I know you said it's been 14 years, but like that just never goes. And so I just want to acknowledge him and the impact he's clearly made on you and in your life. And I'm going to pull a little more on that question, because I do believe every moment is serving the person we get to become. And you are an incredible leader. You are responsible for developing and growing leaders. I said in the beginning of the podcast episode, you do it with solo entrepreneurs, you do it with corporate companies, you do it with individuals, you've even done it for the White House. And so we're talking about high level leadership. How specifically, or what specifically did you take from your father's passing that you bring into your coaching today? Because I asked this question selfishly because so many people look at things that happen in their lives and that's the Achilles heel. It's the thing that's brought them down, or it's a thing they can't get over, or it's a thing that they want to heal. And I'm always wanting to serve people to remind them, as you had said, it was your greatest gift. Your mom had the foresight to be able to say his passing was the greatest gift. We would never choose the passing, but in the passing, you gained so much. And so I want to just knuckle down a little more there, more than anything, so that people can look at what's happening in their life right now, that thing that's really hard for them right now, and for them to ask the question, man, where's the gift in this process?
Yeah, yeah. I think I'm going to answer that in two ways. First, and it was a line that he used to use a lot, there is no refund on yesterday. There's no refund on yesterday. No going back and redoing it. But tomorrow you have choice. Tomorrow you have power, right? What you choose to do tomorrow, right? And today is a lesson. Today is like that wonderful saying, this is the other answer, which is the universe will give you the lessons you need to learn. And when you don't learn them, the universe will pound that lesson at you over and over and over again, right? We have so much power in doing something different tomorrow, right? So for the ones that we've all gone through it, right? Some of us more severe than others, the traumas, the challenges, the pitfalls, the obstacles, the bumps, right? There's no refund on that, right? But what we do with that tomorrow is really that's the power, right? And I think back to the audience, one of the things that we got to really get back into is actioning things, right? It's not about going and reading the next book. It's not about sort of signing up for the next course. It's about applying and actioning the thing, right? Like, what are we going to do tomorrow? So I would encourage the audience to take that, which is, that whole saying, you can't dwell on the past. It's kind of true, but, we can take a lot from that and we can choose now what we do with it, right? Back to information.
Beautiful. I knew that would be the response. And so you've already answered this question, but I love to ask this in every episode. And you gave one, but I want to give you an opportunity to either repeat it or to give another one. But what is one book that has been just such a profound shift or change in your perspective that has supported you in being a better human?
I'm gonna give two books. In the work we do, the Burns model, it's called Games People Play. In fact, I just ordered a new copy. It just showed up from Amazon because I want to put it on the bookshelf. I've given my copies away. It is the fundamental book to all the work that I do. Games People Play, and introduces us to this whole concept of, again, the ego states and the personality and the transactions. And there's been a couple different sort of, people that have added to that and taken that concept and written some books. And I'll give it off to my father. It's actually, I haven't spoken about this book in a long time. It's a book called One Powerful Mind. This was his book that he wrote on emotional intelligence and management. And there's tons of books, but for today's episodes, I'm gonna stick it out with those two. If the audience wants to check out Burns, Game People Play, and then of course One Powerful Mind by his name was Paul Witz.
I love that. And you mentioned the first in the very beginning, and I'd made a note of it. And so I'm glad that you repeated it at the end. And I'm also loving that you added your fathers in. And so I hope people go and grab them. You are an incredible man, I can tell you just have an unbelievable intellect about you, the way that you can articulate messages and so beautifully support people to move them forward. I know that you have a program called Be a Better Leader, specifically called Better Leader. Speak into a little bit about how people can learn about that and how they can find you outside of Going to Better Human podcast. I would love for my audience to jump over and learn a little bit more about you.
Awesome. So for the audience, it's super simple. You could go to Witz, WITZ, education.com. It's got everything there. In fact, there's actually a whole, I've got about a 30-minute free training video on the ego states, which describes the personality and everything that we've gone through in way more detail. So if anyone's ever interested, they can go and do that. And there's a free assessment that they can do, which gets a little bit of a profile for where they sit within the ego states. The other thing is Better Human Podcast. Go check us out on Spotify and Apple. And if you like some episodes, we're going to have Rudi on the show as well. So, at least you could go for your audience, go and like that episode and share it out a little more. And then I'm everywhere on social. So if you want to come and connect with me on social, Instagram or LinkedIn, or TikTok, or Facebook, or what else do we got? We got X now and a few others. But Greg Witz, WITZ, I'm going to pop up. We post content every day. Again, the exercise of can we continually be pounding out great training and great coaching and great concepts and great pieces where people can digest these things every day and just be reminded of like, hey, you know what? There's tools out there for us to grow and improve. Your life and your business doesn't have to suffer. In fact, if we drop this, you could have a very empowered life if you go and you apply some of these things.
You see there, the most powerful word of the entire episode was if, because we all have a choice. Beautiful. So I want to just nudge our audience there for a second, because, we can listen to a podcast episode while we're blow drying our hair or while we're driving. And then we end the episode and our life carries on. And every now and again, we have people that come on the show and they offer something of value, tremendous value. And that is not just in the episode, it's in what they offer at the end of the episode. And you mentioned a few free things that people could go and take from your website, from the assessment or from your webinar. And so often when I'm talking to people, as I'm traveling or speaking at an event, they say that they are very hesitant to touch anything that's free because they're going to get sold something at the end of what they're getting. But what I love so much about the messaging that you've had throughout this, and you mentioned it in 2022, you turned around and said to your team, let's give it away for free. My wife and I, we were in a very similar situation in 2020, and we turned around and said, man, what do we have today that we didn't have yesterday? And we were like, we have a lot of time. We have a lot of free time now because like you, everything dried up. And so we created just free content that we could dump out and pour out into the world. And it was the most exhilarating, fulfilling year of my life. It was also one of the most financially viable years. And it almost had nothing to do with the work we were doing, but there were ripple effects that added to what it became. And the reason I mention any and all of that is because I want our audience to go and take the assessment, because I think it's an incredible tool. I want them to take the webinar and be able to learn a little bit from you. And what I love so much is that at the end of that, people are going to have a better understanding of who you are and how you create an impact. And then they get to make a choice. Is this somebody I want to continue to invest in or not? But I just want to remind our audience, you're worth investing in yourself. You're worth doing the work. And when you ask the questions, you get to reap the reward. When you do the work, you reap the reward. And your life is very much going to be what it is that you do, because it is an if or it is a do. And I want to help support you to the doing. So from my heart to yours, brother, I appreciate for joining us on the InPowered Life podcast. Thank you for your incredible time, for your genius, for dropping into the show, and for just showing up as an incredible human being here and everywhere else out and in the world.
Thank you, man. This has been awesome. And you keep doing what you're doing. The world needs more Rudis out there.
I was going to say the same right back to you. Thank you so much. And to everyone that's listening, thank you so much for joining us on the InPowered Life podcast. We'll catch you in the next episode. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.